Ted Bundy, a name that still sends chills down the spine. A man who hid his twisted desires beneath a mask of charm and normalcy. How did he manage to evade suspicion for so long? Like, comment, and subscribe to support our channel as we explore this chilling story and others like it. The calm before the storm. Ted Bundy, a name synonymous with terror, began his journey toward infamy in the quietest of ways. Before becoming the brutal killer that haunted the Pacific Northwest, he was a well-liked law student, a charming young man with a bright future. To those around him, Ted appeared to be the embodiment of normalcy. He had a promising career ahead, a supportive family, and relationships that seemed unshakable. Yet, beneath this facade, a darkness was growing, one that would eventually devour everything in its path. Ted's first foray into the world of stalking was not accidental. He was meticulous, patient, and calculated. He didn't simply choose his victims at random. He studied them. Women caught his eye, but it wasn't their faces or beauty that interested him. It was their vulnerability. Ted followed them, learned their routines, and understood their habits. He knew when they left for work, when they went for a walk, and even when they would be home alone. This wasn't the work of a random predator. This was someone who was planning every step. His first victims were not murdered immediately. He took his time, learning how to approach them, how to blend into their lives unnoticed. Ted wasn't just looking for a target. He was looking for someone who would fit perfectly into his twisted fantasies. He started with following women through the streets, blending in with the crowd, and then he moved on to something more dangerous, breaking into their homes, peeking through their windows, and watching them sleep. This was the first step in Ted Bundy's descent into madness. The first strike. Ted Bundy's first known attack came on January 4th, 1974. Karen Sparks, only 18 years old, was asleep in her bed in her apartment when Ted broke in. Armed with a bedpost from her own furniture, Ted attacked her in the most brutal way imaginable. He beat her into unconsciousness, leaving her for dead. His belief in her death was so firm that he left her there, assuming she would never awaken. But Karen, against all odds, survived, though her injuries were horrific and her life would be forever altered. This brutal attack was the spark that ignited Ted's insatiable desire for violence, the thrill of the kill, the control he had over the victim's life. It consumed him. But Ted wasn't done. He would go on to plan and execute even more gruesome acts, each time refining his methods, becoming more efficient in his dark work. He knew that the police would soon begin to investigate, but he also knew how to hide in plain sight. Ted's first murder came just a few weeks later, on February 1st, 1974, when he abducted Linda Ann Healy. Linda was a well-known college student in the area, and Ted had been watching her for a long time. He knew her habits, when she would leave for work, and when she would be home alone. Ted attacked Linda in her own room, strangling her and leaving her body in a state of terror. Unlike Karen, Linda wouldn't survive. Ted took her life in the most brutal and intimate of ways, leaving the police with no trace of her whereabouts. The most disturbing part of Ted's attack on Linda was what he did afterward. He didn't just kill her. He dressed her body in her own clothes, a chilling sign of his growing obsession with control. This was no longer just about taking a life. It was about dominating his victim, making her a part of his dark fantasies. The growing darkness, Ted's need to kill, grew stronger with each passing day. He didn't just want to take a life. He wanted to perfect the process. Each victim provided him with a sense of power and control, a feeling that he couldn't get anywhere else in his life. As he grew more brazen, his crimes became more elaborate, his tactics more refined. The stakes were higher now, and Ted was addicted to the rush. On March 12, 1974, Donna Manson disappeared. Donna was a student at Evergreen College, and like many of Ted's victims, she was at a stage in her life where everything seemed full of promise. Donna went to a dance class that evening and then attended a concert at her college. She left the concert and vanished without a trace. Ted was watching her, just as he had watched so many before her. Ted's methods were becoming clearer. He would stalk his victims, sometimes for days, learning their routines and finding the perfect moment to strike. He was no longer just following them. He was planning each attack down to the smallest detail. Ted knew exactly how to lure women in, whether it was using a fake injury or pretending to be in need of help. Once they trusted him, he would take them to a secluded spot where they would become his prey. For Ted, each murder wasn't just about taking a life. It was about asserting control over the victim's body. His desire for dominance was no longer something he could hide. It was all-consuming, and it drove him to kill again and again. With every victim, he felt more empowered, more invincible. But the law was beginning to close in on him. The false sense of security. Ted Bundy wasn't just a killer. He was a master of deception. To those around him, Ted appeared to be the epitome of normalcy. His family, friends, and even his girlfriend, Liz, saw him as a loving, intelligent young man who had everything going for him. He was studying law, had a good job, and was well-liked by his peers. He had an air of trustworthiness, and no one suspected the dark secrets he kept hidden inside. Ted's charm and intelligence allowed him to move through life without raising suspicion. His ability to blend into society made him all the more dangerous. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and those closest to him never realized they were in the presence of a monster. Even as Ted continued his killing spree, he maintained his innocent persona. Liz, his girlfriend, would later reflect on her suspicions. She remembered how Ted's behavior started to change, how he grew more distant and secretive. But despite these signs, she could never have imagined the truth. Ted's ability to compartmentalize his life was remarkable. While he continued to abduct and murder women, he was able to maintain a facade of normalcy. He would come home, have dinner with Liz, and even attend social gatherings, all while hiding his murderous urges. It wasn't until the authorities began to investigate the growing number of disappearances that the wall started to close in on Ted. The tipping point. By 1975, the authorities were starting to connect the dots between the disappearances. Ted's name had come up during investigations, and the evidence against him was slowly mounting. But Ted was still elusive. He knew how to cover his tracks, and even as the police got closer, he continued to evade capture. It wasn't until a routine traffic stop in Utah that Ted's reign of terror began to unravel. A police officer pulled Ted over, and upon searching his car, they found evidence that linked him to several of the missing women. Ted was arrested, and finally the nightmare was over. At least for the moment. Ted's arrest was a turning point, not just for the investigation, but for the victims' families. After years of terror, they were finally going to see justice. But Ted remained defiant, maintaining his innocence even as the evidence against him grew. His calm demeanor and refusal to confess only added to the eerie sense of control he still had over the situation. The confessions. Once in custody, Ted Bundy began to confess to his crimes. The confessions came slowly, but with each passing day, Ted revealed more about his dark past. He spoke with a chilling calmness, describing how he stalked, abducted, and killed his victims. He didn't seem to show any remorse for what he had done. His focus was on recounting the details of his horrific acts. Ted's confessions were not just an admission of guilt. They were a window into the mind of a killer. He described his victims, his methods, and the pleasure he took from killing. The more he spoke, the more disturbing it became. Ted's need for control and dominance over his victims was palpable, and it was clear that his crimes were not just random acts of violence. They were carefully orchestrated rituals meant to fulfill his darkest desires. For the families of Ted's victims, the confessions were a bittersweet moment. The truth was finally coming out, but it came too late for many. The pain of losing a loved one could never be erased, no matter how many details Ted provided. The final days, as Ted awaited his execution, his confessions continued to haunt the nation. The media coverage of his trial and eventual sentencing was extensive, with the public riveted by his story. Ted was convicted of several murders, but many of his crimes remained unsolved. He continued to manipulate those around him, even as he sat on death row. On January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair, bringing an end to one of the most notorious serial killer sprees in American history. But his legacy would live on, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a mask of normalcy. The families of his victims would never be able to forget the pain he caused, but at least they would know that justice had been served. Conclusion: Ted Bundy's story is one of deception, darkness, and horror. He was able to fool everyone around him, hiding his true self behind a carefully crafted mask. His crimes left a trail of devastation across the country, and the true extent of his horror didn't come to light until it was too late for many of his victims. Ted's ability to manipulate and deceive is a reminder of how dangerous the most charming faces can be. Thank you for watching. If you found this story chilling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories.